Assalamu alaikum. In this video, we'll look at how God and Israel are described as being in an erotic relationship in rabbinic literature and some other erotic material as well. Here's what we'll open with. This is a narration in the Babylonian Talmud, Yoma 54a. Continuing the previous discussion, Rav Katina said, when the Jewish people would ascend for one of the pilgrimage festivals, the priests would roll up the curtain for them and show them the cherubs, which were clinging to one another, and say to them, "See how you are beloved before God, like the love of a male and female." And then they've written here as an explanation, the commentator has written the explanation that the two cherubs symbolize the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Jewish people. So there are two cherubs, and they're clinging to each other, like a male and a female cling to each other. And one of the cherubs symbolizes God, and the other cherub symbolizes the Jewish people. So, number one, you make the statue, which represents God, and then you have it in a sexual position, erotic position of clinging with its wife, which is supposed to be Israel. The fact that it's supposed to be erotic will come even clearer as we read on. So, this is just a continuation now in Yoma 54b. It means like a man joined and clinging to his partner, i.e. his wife. In other words, the cherubs appeared to be embracing one another. So Reish Lakish said, when the Gentiles destroyed the second temple and entered the sanctuary, they saw these drawings of cherubs clinging to one another. They peeled them from the wall, took them out to the markets, and said, "These Jews, whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse," due to their fear of God, they've written, "they should be occupied with such matters." So the Romans, when they destroyed the temple, it seems to be the Romans, I would think. When they destroyed the temple, they came and they saw these two images of these cherubs in this erotic clinging, and they said, "These Jews, they're supposed to be righteous apparently, and yet look how they're representing their gods in this sexual, or their God in this sexual relationship, right?" And you can see it sounds very much like paganism, which might explain why I slipped and said gods, because literal statues, or statues, and one is of God and the other is of Israel, and this is paganism. Anyway, so again, the Romans say, should they be occupied in such matters, making images of this kind? They immediately debased and destroyed them, as it stated, all who honored her debase her because they have seen her nakedness. Okay, so the fact that the Romans are so offended here, and the fact that this verse about nakedness is quoted, okay, the fact that they debase, this makes it clear that these are really idols and that these were in a sexual position. But just to confirm that further, Michael Fishbane, in his book Biblical Myth and Rabbinic Myth-Making, in chapter 8, he writes, so he quotes this, again, "Behold, you are beloved before God as the love between a man and a woman," so the narration we just looked at. And then he comments, "This depiction of the relationship between the cherubim I'll read that again. This depiction of the relationship between the cherubim conveys strong erotic overtones connected with the inner sanctum of the shrine and may be an iconic trace of some esoteric doctrine." So what's he saying here? Again, that there is a strong erotic overtone to this narration. So the cherubs are in an erotic position. And then in the footnote he writes, in the sequel, which we also looked at, 54b, Reish Lakish gives another version of the coupling and the contempt of the pagans who see it. There is no doubt but that the verb mi'urim, which is used there in the narration, that's the word that's used, and he says there is no doubt that this verb has sexual overtones and is related to erva, which means nakedness, as can be seen already in the proof text found in the Talmud in connection with Reish Lakish's tradition. Again, we saw this in the Talmud, that the Talmud quotes, they saw her nakedness, okay, which again confirms it's sexual. The noun ma'or, used with respect to the open space in the figuration of the cherubim, is also cited in the Talmud 54a with sexual implications, and it is to be compared to such a use of ma'or in Nahum, chapter 3, verse 5, as noted by Moshe Weinfeld. Okay, and then he finishes off by saying that Rashi also understood ma'orim as cleaving in the sexual sense. So this here, a scholar confirming for us that when it says the cherubim were clinging to each other like a husband and wife, the verb used there has sexual overtones. Now, just before that, in Yoma 54a, we see something else which is strange. Rabbi Yehuda raised a contradiction. It is written, the ends of the staves were seen, and it is written in the same verse, but they could not be seen without. How can one reconcile this contradiction? They were seen and yet not seen, i.e. the staves were partially visible. This was also taught in a Bereta, that's a solution, that they were partially visible. And then they say this was also taught in a Bereta. The ends of the staves were seen. One might have thought that they did not move from their position and did not protrude at all. Therefore, the verse states, and the staves were so long. One might have thought that they ripped through the curtain and emerged on the other side. Therefore, the verse states, they could not be seen without. And then here is the part that we're looking for. Okay. How is this so? The staves of the ark pushed and protruded and stuck out against the curtain towards the outside and appeared like the two breasts of a woman pushing against her clothes. As it is stated, my beloved is to me like a bundle of myrrh that lies between my breasts. And then the rabbis commentate here, for this reason, the ark of the covenant where the divine presence rests, is positioned so that its staves protrude through the curtain like the breasts of a woman. So, according to some verses in the Bible and a number of rabbinic traditions, God literally was inside the temple, and the place where he rests, the staves of that place protruded out like they were the breasts of a woman. So God is laying on top of what looks like breasts. So that's, again, sexual imagery, strangeness, and we see this sort of similar narrations now. So this is in a midrash, Tanhuma Buber. Another interpretation, thus shall you bless, this text is related, there is his bed, the one belonging to Solomon, with 60 warriors around it. What reason did the author of Canticles, meaning Song of Solomon, Solomon, have to be concerned with a bed? When it is said, there is his bed, it is simply that the verse was only concerned with the king to whom peace belonged. There is his bed. This is the temple. But why was the temple compared to a bed? It is simply that just as a bed is only for being fruitful and multiplying, so it was with the temple. So a bed is used, to have babies on it. You have babies on a bed. That's what they're saying, right? You have intercourse and you make babies, and that's why the temple is compared to a bed. And again, the idea is that God, in Judaism, he's on top of it. That's where the divine presence is resting, at least inside the temple. Okay, so again, but why was the temple compared to a bed? It is simply that just as a bed is only for being fruitful and multiplying, so it was with the temple. Whatever was in it was being fruitful and multiplying, as stated. The poles grew so long, etc., etc. Why was the temple compared to a forest? Just as a forest is fruitful and multiplies, so is the case with the temple. Whatever was in it was being fruitful and multiplying. So, again, just like strange sexual imagery and language. This is Shir HaShirim Rabbah. Another matter, indeed, our bed is fresh, just as this bed is made only for comfort, so too until the temple was constructed, the divine presence. I'll read that again. Another matter, indeed, our bed is fresh. Just as this bed is made only for comfort, so too, until the temple was constructed, the divine presence was tossed from place to place. That is what is written. I would have made my way in a tent and in a tabernacle. Once the temple was constructed, this is my resting place forever. So basically, before the temple was constructed, God was just moving round and round, and it seems he was not comfortable. When the temple was made, now he could have comfort. Another matter, indeed our bed is fresh, just as this bed is made only for comfort, so too until the temple was constructed, the Israelites were tossed from place to place. Okay, so now they're talking about how that relates to the Israelites. Continues, another matter, indeed our bed is fresh. Just as this bed is only for procreation, so too until the temple was constructed, go count Israel. Once it was constructed, Judah and Israel were numerous. So perhaps there's some imagery of the bed, which we know is like the bed of the temple, and inside the temple they're protruding like breasts, and God's presence is there, and this language of like procreation and all this stuff, it's just very strange. Another matter, indeed our bed is fresh, just as this bed is only for procreation, so too until the temple was constructed. The entire congregation together was 42,000. Once the temple was constructed, they procreated. So the Israelites procreated. Okay, now we move on to Pasikta de Rav Kahana. So this is Pisca 1. So this is God. He says, I am come back into my garden, my sister, my bride. And this is Song of Solomon chapter 5, verse 1. And now they're going to comment on it. Rabbi Azariah, citing Rabbi Judah bar Rabbi Simon, told a parable of a king who became so angry at his wife that he deposed her and cast her out of his palace. After a time, while he was willing to bring her back and restore her to her palace, she said, let him first renew for my sake his former practice of accepting from my hand whatever I offered him. Then let him bring me back and restore me to my place. Thus, in the past, when the Holy One had withdrawn far from men into heaven, yet from above he would still accept their offerings, as it is said of Noah's offering, from above the Lord smelled the sweet odor. Now, however, he will renew his ancient practice of accepting their offerings, while close to them here on the earth below. I am come below into my garden, my sister, my bride. Thus, incidentally, according to Rabbi Hanina, Torah teaches one good manners, as that a groom is not to enter the bridal bower until his bride gives him leave. Let my beloved come into his garden, and only after that I am come into my garden. So let's break this down. What's going on? So, God comes to Israel basically, and he says to Israel, I'm here to take you back, it seems, after he had divorced Israel. But Israel doesn't accept it. It was like, no, I'm going to negotiate with God. I'll only accept you, God, if you go back to your earlier practices. So there's a negotiation going on. And then we're told that this is good manners. A groom should not just enter upon his bride. He should ask her permission. And similarly, they're saying God asked Israel's permission before marrying Israel again. What is this? Negotiating with God and then giving your demands to God, and only then God can, ask you to be his people? Like, what is this? Or come into the covenant with usury? As in, like, this, it's just very strange to have this sort of negotiation tactic. If you're, disrespectfully saying to God, let him first renew for my sake his former practice. Then let him bring me back and restore me to my palace. So you're like giving demands to God, and you're saying that God cannot just come. He needs your permission first and stuff. It's just strange. And all this stuff of like Israel and God are like lovers and their husband and a wife. This is very, very weird. And we even saw in the beginning how they're literally two idols, an idol of God and an idol of Israel, and they're in a sexual relationship. I mean, that is very extreme. Now, Allah said in the Quran, وَأَنَّهُ تَعَالَى جَدُّ رَبِّنَا مَا اتَّخَذَ صَاحِبَةً وَلَا وَلَدًا, and that He, our exalted and glorified Lord, is neither taken a wife nor a child.